Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies are set to expire. What that could mean for health insurance costs for millions of Americans.
We took the freedom of speech away.
And a federal judge's ruling prevents federal agents from targeting reporters and protesters with force. More on the local impact. First off tonight, federal immigration agents deployed tear gas on protesters today as a crowd gathered at the scene of a car crash involving those agents in the city's East Side neighborhood. The Department of Homeland Security says a vehicle driven by someone they believe to be an undocumented immigrant rammed a Border Patrol vehicle before fleeing the scene. As agents stopped the vehicle and detained two people inside, DHS says the crowd turned hostile. The Chicago Police Department says its officers were attempting to de-escalate the situation, but individuals began throwing objects at the federal agents, and that's when DHS agents deployed tear gas, exposing 13 CPD officers and protesters. Passengers flying through O'Hare and Midway airports won't be seeing a controversial message from the Department of Homeland Security featuring Secretary Kristi Noem.
However, Democrats in Congress refuse to fund the federal government.
18 airports across the country, including in major cities like Atlanta, New York City, and Las Vegas, have removed the video playing at TSA checkpoints, saying it is out of step with long-standing policies of not displaying political messaging or content at TSA. Typically, such videos feature government officials welcoming travelers and explaining procedures. A spokesperson for the Portland airport says the video could be violating the Hatch Act, prohibiting the use of public assets for political purposes. In a statement, the Chicago Department of Aviation said advertising at Chicago's airports, including promotional materials and public service announcements, must comply with CDA's advertising guidelines, which prohibit content that endorses or opposes any named political party. Quote, it adds, quote, these guidelines help ensure that the airports remain welcoming and a neutral space for all travelers. Illinois state lawmakers are back in Springfield for the beginning of the annual fall veto session. Their return will be against the backdrop of increased immigration raids across the Chicago region and the looming threat of National Guard troops on local streets. While Democratic leaders say there are limitations on what they can do in light of the federal government's actions, they are looking into any options they may have. Some of the top issues lawmakers will be considering include funding for public transit agencies, energy reform amid a spike in electricity bills this summer, and possible regulations on home insurance companies after a rise in premiums. One issue that likely won't be on the agenda is legislation on the Bears Stadium project in Arlington Heights. Advocates for survivors of domestic violence are opening a new center to help respond to what they say is an escalating problem for the city.
What we have seen is an increase in domestic violence. We've had 43 women killed since I took office in a domestic violence related murder. We continue to see our gun crimes continue to drop, but domestic violence arrests now comprise 26% increase over a year ago. That's not tenable. We cannot accept that.
Cook County State's Attorney Eileen O'Neill Burke was on hand at the grand opening of the Chicago Advocacy Network for Hope, or Can Hope, in the Garfield Park neighborhood. It's the city's first family justice center, providing housing support, legal advocacy, and counseling under one roof for survivors of domestic violence. The agency says the need for support is growing. The Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline received nearly 19,000 calls last year, up 78% since 2019. Up next, sticker shock for some people in the market for health insurance right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Millions of Americans could soon face higher health insurance costs as enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies are set to expire at the end of the year. Those subsidies, introduced in 2022, helped more than double enrollment in ACA marketplace plans. Now, a report from the nonpartisan Urban Institute warns that around 5 million people could lose their coverage if subsidies aren't extended. Joining us with more are Anuj Gangopadhyay, professor of economics at Loyola University, Chicago, and via Zoom, Wendy Epstein, professor of law at DePaul University, and Ann Gillespie, director of the Illinois Department of Insurance. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. Wendy Epstein, starting with you, please clarify for us which subsidies are set to expire and what will happen to premiums if they do.
So when the Affordable Care Act was passed back in 2010, it did include subsidies that were written into the law that would help people buy policies on the exchange. So these are folks that are not eligible for Medicaid and did not have access to affordable employer-sponsored insurance. Those subsidies are, as I said, written into the law and are not what's at stake here. But in 2021, when Congress passed a law to help folks with COVID, they wrote in some enhanced subsidies so people could get access to lower cost insurance plans if they were particularly low income. Folks that made close to the cutoff also got access to insurance. Nobody had to pay more than 8.5% of their income in health insurance.
So what's the impact on premiums if these subsidies, these extended or enhanced subsidies, do expire?
Insurance companies are anticipating at this point that the enhanced subsidies are not going to continue. And so they've already built in some rate increases into their proposed rates for the coming calendar year. So rates are going to go up for folks.
Ann, is there any way for Illinoisans to know how much they might have to pay in the ACA marketplace?
Hi, yes, we are in the process of sending out enrollment notices to everybody who has been on the marketplace in the last year, and they will see in those notices exactly what the premium changes are going to be. In addition, we will have, as soon as open enrollment starts November 1st, we will have that information available on the getcoveredillinois.gov website as well. So they will see what their premiums are going up to.
Okay. Anuj, we're hearing about this November 1st deadline, of course. Democrat and some Republican lawmakers have called for the subsidies to be extended before open enrollment begins. Congress, meanwhile, has until the end of the year to extend these subsidies. Some people, though, are getting notice of higher premiums. Anuj, what does this mean for people when they go to the market?
Well, let's just be clear. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to come back to you, Ann. I promise. Anuj, I wanted to get him in. Go on.
The first thing to keep in mind here is that this market came online in 2014. So we're talking 27. If I go back to 2017, health insurance premiums have increased by about 66% over that period of time. But the consumer, the American, average American, has been blunted from this because of these subsidies. And now they're going to starting to face the actual price, the actual harm of healthcare prices and where they've gone lately. So this could be a bit of a shock for enrollees when they come to the healthcare.gov or a state-based exchange in November and they start seeing prices that premiums that could expand by 2 to 4, a factor of 4. The big nervousness on the public health side is that could this change the composition of enrollees entering the marketplaces? Could this leave out people who are maybe say somewhat healthy? Maybe this is an opportunity to forego health insurance altogether. The individual mandate's no longer in effect. If the pool gets sicker, the worry is what will happen to plans down the road. Do they have to further increase premiums to maintain to cover these costs? And that could introduce this concept of a death spiral, where health insurance plans could just become not viable in this marketplace in the absence of these federal subsidies. So there's a lot of concerns about what people are going to see on these websites in open enrollment now.
There's also the chance that millions could go without insurance nationwide. What do the numbers tell us about Illinois and more specifically in Chicago?
Sure. This is from my colleagues over at the Urban Institute. They have a prediction of nationally we're talking about 5 million people. That's their best estimate. There's obviously some uncertainty baked into these estimates. 5 million people might be facing uninsured, going uninsured. Among the 5 million, if I drill down to state level estimates, in Illinois, we're looking at something on the order of magnitude of 100,000 people. And in the Chicagoland area, if you look at congressional districts in Chicago, they anticipate something on the order of 60,000 people. This is not small numbers, right, for the context of a state, a major city, and for the nation as a whole.
And the Department of Insurance, of course, you all administer Get Covered Illinois, which is now a state-based health insurance marketplace. How could this be a more flexible alternative for folks instead of the federal ACA marketplace?
Mm-hmm. There's a number of ways that we have more flexibility as a state-based marketplace. One of the key ones is that we now run the Navigator program, who are the people that work with insureds or potential insureds to help them find coverage that fits their healthcare needs and their budget. And that's critical this year. As you're seeing these premium increases go up, we want to make sure that people still reach out and talk to navigators. Don't assume there's nothing that you can afford, because we have over 1,000 different plan options available, and our navigators are here to work with you to try to customize a solution for you. The other thing that we have the flexibility to do now is to have special enrollment periods that we can control versus the federal government. So 2 new ones we're going to be doing this year include a pregnancy special enrollment period. If you become pregnant between open enrollment periods, you can sign up to still get coverage via this special enrollment. And we're doing easy enrollment, which is in collaboration with the Illinois Department of Revenue, that there will be a checkbox on your tax return this year that allows you to indicate that you would like information about healthcare coverage, and then we will reach out and follow up on that and get you talking to a navigator or a broker to help you find something.
Taxes in healthcare. So Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries today, he framed these ACA subsidies as part of the broader push for affordable healthcare. Here he is.
I think what we've made clear is that you've got to cancel the cuts, lower the costs, save healthcare. That involves addressing the Medicaid crisis that Republicans have created, a Medicare crisis, hospitals, nursing homes, community-based health clinics closing all across the country, and of course extending the Affordable Care Act tax credit so that tens of millions of Americans don't experience dramatically increased health care costs.
Wendy, of course, you know, this whole issue is at the crux of this government shutdown, the second week we are in currently. How does the potential end of these subsidies, though, does it fit into the larger conversation about health care access under this administration?
So I think what we're looking at is a need to have a global approach to this problem. We talk about, we have a fractured healthcare system in the U.S. Some folks are getting access to insurance through Medicaid, some through Medicare, some through their employer, some through these marketplace plans. But we need to figure out how to make sure that everybody has access to affordable coverage. And the Republicans and the Democrats just purely disagree about how best to accomplish that.
Anuj, what are some of the choices that some families might have to make when faced with these higher premiums when they go to the marketplace?
I think there's really three alternatives here. The first is you have to find an alternative source of coverage potentially, but that seems unlikely. As it was noted already, this is a group that's already they make too much income to be eligible for Medicaid. And if they had an employer plan on the table, they would have taken it presumably because they wouldn't have been qualified for the subsidies in the marketplace in the first place. So they don't. This seems like the population that doesn't have a lot of other alternatives for coverage. So what's the second alternative now? Maybe I pay through the nose on and pay this premium and take the insurance. What's the problem with that is I'm left with less income on the other end, and you know we should go to some of these reports I've highlighted. The change in the premiums is astonishing, and over a year this is quite a large sum of money that would have probably for these families been spent on groceries, housing, home improvements, etc., childcare, books as well. And the third is the option is go uninsured entirely, right? So we've had now 2 to 3 decades of evidence from the Affordable Care Act and before that on the effects of insurance. What happens when people go uninsured? Well, they use the healthcare system less. They get needed detections at lower rates, so you may not find the cancer diagnosis that you need, say. Mortality rates go up, and financial protections go down. Mental health does not go in a good direction either. You have less food security, more housing eviction rates, so all sorts of bads come as a result of this. So no great options for families.
A lot of tough choices. Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to our guests, Anuj Gangappadhyay, Wendy Epstein, and Ann Gillespie. We appreciate it. Up next, a look at what some are calling an assault on free speech. Federal agents are now temporarily barred from using riot control weapons like tear gas and pepper spray on reporters and protesters who aren't an immediate threat. Federal judge's ruling comes after a group of reporters and protesters sued the Trump administration last week. Meanwhile, President Trump is ramping up his crackdown on the press and his critics. Here are some of his recent comments.
We took the freedom of speech away because that's been through the courts, and the court said you have freedom of speech. But what has happened is when they burn a flag, it agitates and irritates crowds. They've never seen anything like it on both sides, and you end up with riots.
Here with more on what's happening are Charles Whitaker, Dean of Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, and Kevin Fee, Legal Director at the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois. Welcome back. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Great to be back.
So the ruling that we're talking about, it grants a temporary restraining order protecting journalists and protesters who are not a public safety threat. We just covered at the top of the show today that this morning ICE agents deployed tear gas on protesters and CPD officers were exposed as well. This happened near 105th and Avenue in the East Side neighborhood. There are reports that protesters were throwing objects, reports from CPD officers that objects were being thrown at the ICE agents. Kevin, could that mean that the agents were potentially in violation of the restraining order? Is this the kind of thing that would have to get investigated or heard before court before we get that far?
We are, actively monitoring situations on the ground that are, of course, rapidly changing. But yes, I mean, we're definitely looking to see whether incidents like this or others, when the full facts come out, are violations of the court order. And if they are, we fully expect to bring them to the court's attention so that the order is enforced.
How is that kind of line drawn in real life? Is it up to the officers on the ground, the agents on the ground, or?
Well, ultimately,
how do you figure that out?
Sure, yeah, it's up to the court ultimately, based on the provisions of the order that she's entered, whether the facts that the parties bring to her when they allege a violation of the order cross any of those lines that she's drawn.
Charles, what does this ruling mean for journalists?
I think it's an important marker in local and national jurisprudence. It says what is codified in the Constitution, that reporters who are attempting to document the actions of federal agents who are operating, in the name of the government should be allowed to do so without fear of harm and harassment. That's an important marker.
Overall, what is sort of your reaction to the fact that this is where we are, that journalists are taking the federal government to court to sue over its rights?
This should be taken for granted, right? We should understand that journalists are here to do a job, that they're operating on behalf of the public and in the public's best interest. And yet, because of the attacks, both verbal and online, of journalists right now, we do have to take the extraordinary means of suing to ensure that those rights are protected.
Kevin, what have you heard from clients about what they've been experiencing outside the Broadview ICE facility and their protesting?
Well, for weeks in the run-up to this lawsuit, clergy, protesters, members of the press were gathered at Broadview and elsewhere, protesting the actions of this administration, and frankly being subjected to violence, very real violence at the hands of federal officials. Rubber bullets, tear gas, pepper balls fired sometimes from very close range, directly at people's faces, directly at people's bodies. It was a really quite dangerous situation for those involved and for people who were really just out there trying to exercise their cherished First Amendment rights.
The restraining order is temporary, set to expire on the 23rd. What happens next?
So next is the preliminary injunction stage of the case, where we seek to extend the protection that was granted by the temporary restraining order for the pendency of the case. That will come after the court has a hearing where she will hear evidence from both sides and determine whether the protection that she has granted to these plaintiffs will continue as long as the case is pending.
Trump, he initially pushed for free speech when he was campaigning. Here's a little bit of that.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple, just like dominoes, one by one.
Charles, do you think has he changed his tune? Because we heard what he said at the beginning of the segment, and then obviously we know what he said before.
I think the government's interpretation of free speech is you are free to praise the government, but any speech that in any way criticizes or attempts to shed light on government action is not as welcome as speech that promotes the public relations line of the administration.
Kevin, same question.
I completely agree with Professor Whitaker. I mean, this administration's conception of free speech is entirely selective, which of course means that it's not free at all.
Charles, how do you think journalists should be covering these situations, though, when tensions are high? And, you know, we've got a number of citizen journalists on the ground as well now, with so many people using their phones to document what they're seeing.
I'm actually grateful for those citizen journalists actually who are out there documenting these episodes. We wouldn't have as clear a picture of what's going on were it not for them. I think journalists do need to take care, extreme caution, and we counsel our students to do that. But I am so proud of the intrepid journalists who are there attempting to shed light on, again, what's happening in the name of the government.
Kevin, where do you draw the line between free speech and public safety?
Well, free speech is guaranteed by the First Amendment, right? And public safety is enforced by law enforcement officers in ways that are neutral or intended to be or supposed to be under the Constitution, viewpoint neutral. Where you start to get into trouble is where public safety is enforced in a way that really burdens one particular viewpoint. That's a First Amendment violation. That's First Amendment retaliation, and that's exactly what we saw here.
Meanwhile, of course, we're seeing media outlets just today, CNN, Fox News, even Newsmax, which is considered, fairly conservative television cable news outlet. They're all pushing back against the Pentagon's new press access rules. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying that the press, quote, no longer roams free, referring to the Pentagon. The media also must wear visible badges and can't, quote, solicit criminal acts. Charles, what impact do you think this will have on journalists' ability to report the administration accurately?
Well, it is absolutely an attempt at censorship, sort of pre-publication restraint on news outlets. But it's heartening to see a variety of news outlets from each perspective coming together and saying that this is untenable. This is not journalism. This is public relations.
That said, what happens, right? Can the Pentagon actually deny reporters access?
They certainly can make it difficult, but try to limit access as much as possible. But what we've seen, and they're attempting to prevent leaks, what we've seen is that there are many people within the Pentagon who care about what's happening, who care about democracy, who care about free speech. There will be ways around this. It will just be more difficult.
Remind us of, there have been times in history where classified or top secret information.
The Pentagon Papers is a fine example of that, right? Where the Nixon administration tried to prevent the release of documents that would have accounted for the history of the Vietnam War. That was struck down by the Supreme Court. I am not convinced, however, given the antipathy that the conservative members of this court have for the media, that we would have the same outcome today. So it'll be very curious to see how this plays out.
Kevin, what else can people do if they believe that their free speech rights are being curtailed?
Well, I think they can really take inspiration from the brave coalition of clergy, of members of the press, of protesters who, insisted that their rights be respected by bringing this lawsuit in front of this court. In this moment and at this, geographical location, Northern Illinois, if folks feel that their rights are being violated in a way that violates the terms of this order, if they're subjected to unlawful arrest or to tear gas canisters without warning or indiscriminately applied, they should contact the litigation team, and we will bring those violations to the court. Outside the bounds of this litigation, I just encourage people to continue to speak up, speak out, show up and make their voices heard, because that's what the First Amendment's all about.
Same question to you, Charles, in about 20 seconds. Journalists, what can journalists do?
I agree with Kevin. I think we have to continue to press forward to, again, shed light on what's happening in the administration. We have an obligation in order to inform the public. Journalism is a pillar of the democracy. It's important that we have a free press.
Okay. I'm thankful for that too, the free press. I'm thankful to both of you for joining us, Charles Whitaker and Kevin Fee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandis.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. You can stream Chicago Tonight on our WTTW YouTube channel every evening and catch up on any programs you may have missed. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports inclusionary excellence throughout the legal profession.